As a society, we widely condemn child sexual abuse. We regard it as one of the most serious crimes against some of our most vulnerable members, and we recognise its devastating and lifelong impacts. Yet, while we profess to detest this abuse of children and those who perpetrate it, the wider culture treats female children, girls, as appropriate objects of men's sexual desire, normalizing and eroticizing men's sexual use and abuse of children. Consider the widespread popularity of teen and barely legal pornography, depicting teen girls with pigtails, flat chests, and braces, all served up for men's sexual gratification, or the fetishization of schoolgirls and the sexy schoolgirl costumes sold in mainstream retailers. Then there's the adult shops selling male masturbators modeled on the bodies of teen girls, like the Teenage Dream, the Lolita, or virgin-themed products marketed as youthful and tight, designed to emulate the vaginas of teenage girls. And the global social media platforms like Instagram, which Collect a Shout has exposed, and Twitter hosting sexualized content of underage girls, some of which legally constitutes child sex abuse material. And for those who don't know, the NCOSI Law Centre has recently filed a lawsuit against Twitter for knowingly hosting and distributing child sexual abuse material. Collect a Shout has also exposed major bookstores and online marketplaces selling erotic ebooks that feature incest and child abuse themes, typically eroticizing men's abuse of girls, often daughters and stepdaughters. More recently, we've exposed global online marketplace Etsy for selling child sex abuse dolls and body parts, and child abuse and incest themed products such as t-shirts, temporary tattoos, and other merchandise with slogans like, and these are graphic, Daddy's little cock whore, Harder Daddy, Daddy's cum dumpster, and many others. And you can join nearly 20,000 people in signing our petition calling on Etsy to withdraw these products, and we'd really appreciate that. The sexual practice known as age play, or DDLG, Daddy Dom Little Girl, in which adults recreate and enact fantasy scenarios of men's sexual abuse of girls, highlights how the power dynamics of incest and child sexual abuse have been repackaged as a fun, sexy fantasy. Defenders of these practices assert that because there's no children involved, there can be no harm, and they frame their playing with the dynamics of child sexual abuse as a legitimate form of sexual expression. Once it's branded a kink, just about any sexual practice can be afforded special protection, rendering it off limits for critical or feminist analysis. Any objection or questioning of such practices is therefore kink shaming, a crime far worse than simply treating child sexual abuse as a fun, sexy game. And I'm being very sarcastic if that wasn't clear. So we need to ask what exactly is being eroticized here? Who benefits from this power dynamic and who is harmed by it? At the core of this practice is the belief that men's sexual domination of and complete power over a vulnerable child, typically a girl, often a daughter, as I've said, is erotic, and that girls both invite and enjoy being raped by adult men, including their fathers. And it's within this wider culture, a system of male sexual dominance and female sexual subordination, and the eroticization of female children, that we must situate the development of female-bodied child sex abuse dolls designed for men's sexual use. From calls to destigmatize pedophilia and pedophiles rebranding as minor attracted persons, we're seeing a deliberate effort to disentangle pedophilia from child sexual abuse. Inside academia, pedophilia is typically understood as a legitimate and unchangeable sexual orientation. Researchers distinguish between medically designated pedophiles, and these are men who are exclusively sexually attracted to children, and child sex offenders who may also have a sexual interest in or offend against adults. Not all child sex offenders are pedophiles, and not all pedophiles sexually offend against children, they say. Some pedophiles make a conscious choice not to, and they describe themselves as non-offending or virtuous pedophiles. Some academics and advocates paint pedophiles as victims of their circumstances, lamenting the, quote, unfortunate situation in which they find themselves. A number of male academics and advocates working in this space argue that since pedophiles can't ethically act on their sexual desires to rape and abuse children, they need to have access to sexual outlets that will allow them to simulate this abuse. And these include so-called virtual or artificial child pornography, such as computer-generated or artistic depictions of non-existing children, so content that's produced without the use of living children, as well as child sex abuse dolls. And again, the argument is that as long as there's no child involved, there's no harm. But underpinning calls to make these sexual outlets available to pedophiles is the acceptance of men's sexual preferences as absolute, that men have a right to sex and should be able to have it in any way they want it. These male academics are so deeply committed to their belief in men's sexual entitlement that their answer to men who want to sexually abuse children is not to challenge their sexual appetites for children, not to encourage the pursuit of healthier practices or relationships that don't involve children, but to create replica children for men to enact their rape fantasies. Some, in their defense of men's access to child sex abuse dolls, argue that failing to provide pedophiles with childlike dolls to simulate child sexual abuse could be harmful. A few of these arguments border on emotional blackmail, that if we don't allow pedophiles to use child sex abuse dolls, they might abuse living children. In his 2017 paper proposing child sex bots be made available to pedophiles for therapeutic use, philosopher Mark Berend described the potential cost of not providing child sex abuse dolls or robots to pedophiles. Quote, if the end justifies the means, any kind of therapeutic option should be considered, analysed, scrutinised, weighed, and even tried. Can civil society still afford to take the risk of seeing other unfortunate victims unwittingly hooked to the appalling web of sex offenders, other souls traumatised for life, other murdered children? End quote. And Berend won the inaugural David Levy Special Best Paper Award for that paper. The Prostasia Foundation, which campaigns against laws criminalising virtual child sex abuse material, as well as campaigning against laws criminalising child sex abuse dolls, published an article entitled How Dolls Could Help Prevent Child Sexual Abuse, written by the owner of a child sex abuse doll. The author disputes any link between child sex abuse dolls and child sexual abuse. He claims that child sex abuse doll owners feel a strong desire to nurture, likening the experience to owning a pet dog, but also acknowledges that some doll owners, quote, receive sexual gratification from their childlike dolls. He goes on to accuse lawmakers who are proposing legislation to criminalise child sex abuse dolls of eliminating outlets for pedophiles, quote, taking away from those who have few, if any, other outlets of sexual expression. For this child sex abuse doll owner, the potential criminalisation of child sex abuse dolls represents an attempt to outlaw, quote, the sexual thoughts and private behaviours of doll owners. And he threatens that preventing men's access to child sex abuse dolls might just push them over the edge and result in their sexually abusing a child. But contrary to the claims from defenders of child sex abuse dolls, the reality isn't as simple as a doll or a child. Men who are charged with child sex abuse doll offences are frequently found to be sexually offending against children in additional ways. Many are found in possession of child sexual abuse material, such as images and video of children being sexually abused, raped, and tortured. Others prey on or sexually offend against living children in different ways. And over the past few months, I started documenting these cases, and I'll share some of them with you now. Brisbane man Terry Dunnett, aged 44, was charged after he was found with 3 child sex abuse dolls. Police also seized a laptop allegedly containing child abuse material. South Australian man Shane Andrew Laney, aged 35, streamed footage of himself using a child sex abuse doll. He also owned drawing and animated content depicting child sexual abuse of children aged between 3 and 12. Now, this is so-called fictional sexualized representations of children, which in Australia still constitutes illegal child sexual abuse material. And he was also found with images of real children and real child sexual abuse material. In New South Wales, Brent Hazelton, aged 23, was found with the bottom half of a child sex abuse doll that he purchased for $200 from Chinese AliExpress. Australian Border Force officers also found a secure folder on his phone containing 34 pictures of children engaged in sexualized posing and 3 virtual animated videos depicting children engaging in sexualized poses and activity. Also in New South Wales, a police raid at the home of Stephen Capsis, aged 46, found a child sex abuse doll and a trove of child sexual abuse material. Capsis had also been caught at the beach filming intimate videos of young girls in bikinis and zooming in on their genitals using a covert device attached to his car. Last month in New South Wales, a police raid found 2 men with a child sex abuse doll, as well as a computer and several phones containing child sex abuse material. Less than a week ago, an unnamed 58-year-old Sydney man was charged after Australian Border Force officers found a child sex abuse doll in a package from China. When the police searched his home, they also allegedly found child sexual abuse material. In the UK, Richard Turner, aged 47, was found with a rucksack containing a used child sex abuse doll and children's underwear. He was also found in possession of 100,000 images of child sexual abuse material, and 203 of these were of the most serious kind. And he pled guilty to 10 charges of sexually offending against children. 5 of these were sexual assault on someone under 13, 3 more were possessing indecent images of children, and 2 charges were associated with taking indecent photographs of young girls. So you can see, first of all, that owning a child sex abuse doll did not prevent these men from sexually offending against children, but also that some of these men consumed both virtual child abuse material as well as real child sexual abuse material, as in the filmed sexual abuse of children. So they're using both, they're using them interchangeably. This idea then that fictional depictions of child sexual abuse or child sex abuse dolls prevent sexual abuse is just not in line with the reality. Again, coming back to this claim that it's a choice between a doll for men to simulate child sexual abuse on or a child, it's not always a case of one or the other. Some child sex abuse doll owners involve living children in their use of child sex abuse dolls. One way this is done is by commissioning a custom-made doll in the likeness of a known child. South Australian Member of Parliament Connie Benaros, who introduced laws to criminalise childlike dolls in her state, warned that images of children taken in public or even sourced from social media could be used to create child sex abuse dolls. And she said, "You can send a photo of a child to one of the manufacturers of these dolls and ask for that doll to look like that child." This is already happening. Last year, an American mother partnered with Child Rescue Coalition in calling for legislation against child sex abuse dolls after she reportedly discovered a doll sold on Amazon modeled on her 8-year-old daughter, apparently recreating a photo that had been posted on Facebook. In our collective shout investigation of global online marketplace Etsy, my colleague Melinda Lashevsky, posing as a potential buyer, exposed a seller of child sex abuse dolls who, in private communications with her, claimed to have modeled one of the dolls on a 14-year-old Instagram model. We then sent computer-generated images of the faces of non-existing girls to the seller and asked if dolls could be customized to look like these girls. And the seller agreed and offered to change the wig on one of them to appear more like the girl in the picture. Child sex abuse dolls can be and are being designed to resemble living children. What this means is that child sex abuse dolls don't just aid in the fantasy of abusing a generic hypothetical child. They allow male users to victimize a specific child, even without having physical access to them. There's evidence users of child sex abuse dolls are incorporating specific children in their abuse fantasies enacted on dolls. South Australian man Adam Neil Wonnacott, aged 41, was caught with 5 homemade child sex abuse dolls. The dolls had sex toys built into them, were dressed in girls' clothing and located next to a bag of wigs, and some of these had pigtails. One of these dolls had a laminated picture of a real child's face stapled to its head. And like these other cases I've just shared, police also found hundreds of images of child sexual abuse on 60 different USBs. Another collective shout investigation, this time on the sexual exploitation of girls on social media platforms, uncovered a pedophile forum where men shared images, sexualized images of preteen girls that had originally been posted on Instagram. And these men shared their fantasies for raping them. One of the topics of conversation among these men was their desire for child sex abuse robots in the form of a particular 9-year-old child. Far from being a victimless crime, the development of child sex abuse dolls facilitates a new form of technologically mediated child sexual abuse, one where men can simulate rape, abuse, and torture of specific children using customized dolls. Child sex abuse dolls allow men to enact the abuse of children despite physical distance, the sexual abuse and violation of children without predators ever having access to them, without even knowing them or having ever come into contact with them. So what can we do about all this? I think we start by calling out the false claims made by defenders of child sex abuse dolls, that childlike dolls could prevent men from sexually offending against children. They don't. Men who own child sex abuse dolls continue to offend against children in a variety of ways, as we've seen. Child sexual abuse is not a crime that goes away if perpetrators practice it. We need a solid feminist presence to participate in these discussions in academia. We need women who can recognize the highly gendered nature of the sex doll industry and situate the production of child sex abuse dolls within a wider culture that eroticizes girls. And Kathleen and I recently came together with a number of feminist women in academia to form a feminist response to the development of female-bodied sex dolls and robots. And together we founded the Feminist Academy of Technology and Ethics, or the FATES. So watch this space. You can also lobby for legislation to criminalize child sex abuse dolls in your own country, for child sex abuse dolls to be classified as illegal child sex abuse material. You can support organisations working in the space like the Campaign Against Sex Robots and Collective Shout, and you can amplify our voices. And like I said earlier, we're trying to get child sex abuse dolls and other child abuse and incest themed merchandise off Etsy right now. So you can sign our petition and share it with your networks. We've already successfully campaigned to get child sex abuse dolls and body parts pulled from major global platforms like Wish and Alibaba, and we've now set our sights on Etsy. And just before I conclude, while this event today has been primarily focused on sex dolls designed to resemble children, we cannot neglect sex dolls in the form of women in our campaigning efforts. We need to be wary of any distinction between the two that positions child sex abuse dolls as harmful, but adult sex dolls as harmless. As feminists, we reject the idea that violence, abuse, and exploitation in the sex trade becomes acceptable once a girl turns 18. So we can object to child sex abuse dolls and other child sexual abuse material, and also acknowledge this same dehumanizing treatment of women is harmful and shouldn't be tolerated. Some sex doll manufacturers are already attempting to capitalize on this distinction between child sex abuse dolls and so-called adult sex dolls, positioning themselves as somehow ethical because they only sell adult dolls. I read a news article last week where a woman who runs a sex doll company insisted she would never make sex dolls shorter than 140 centimeters, which is child size, as though this was evidence she was a good ethical corporate, like she had high standards in her business selling pornified replica women for men to use for sex on demand. If we accept that men's use of child sex abuse dolls cannot be magically disconnected from children in the real world, and that the production of child sex abuse dolls has real world implications for children, and we should, then it follows that the production and use of sex dolls modeled on adult women will likely have implications for women's lives. Just as men have incorporated living children into their child sex abuse doll use, there's already evidence of men involving real women into their sex doll use. Some doll owners express a desire for their dolls to resemble specific living women. I've seen others discuss how deepfake technology could be utilized to superimpose the faces of specific celebrity women on their dolls while making pornographic videos of their dolls and them using their dolls. There are also cases where women have discovered sex dolls made in their likeness and naturally been deeply distressed by this. So I really urge you to take action, not just against child sex abuse dolls, but female-bodied sex dolls in general that encourage the objectification of women, that reinforce women's subordinate status, and further entrench men's sexual entitlement. And I'll leave it there for today. Thank you very much for watching. Please do send through any questions you might have using the Q&A option, and I'll do my best to answer them. And if you want to follow my work on this issue, you can follow me on Twitter at Caitlin_Roper, or I'm on Instagram at It's Caitlin Roper. And you can also follow the work of Campaign Against Sex Robots and Collective Shout to stay up to date and support our campaigns. Thanks very much.